So let's say an employee went overtime without authorization from their manager or HR. Who's liable? You'd be shocked by the missing information that HR and leadership actually don't take into account here. This is why I brought on John Woodrow, and he and I will be discussing everything pertaining to the collateral damage and aftermath of unauthorized overtime in shift-based businesses. Let's get right into it. It really puts me in a great spot to talk a little bit about what happens, the implications that HR mostly needs to deal with if unauthorized overtime does happen, right? And it definitely happens. I'm sure a lot
Yeah.
of people in the audience can understand that. This next slide is a really awesome slide that we put together on unauthorized overtime FAQs, right? Like talking about what happens when it happens, like what FLSA laws do I need to comply with? What does payment look like? Compensation, all that good stuff. So, Woody, my question for you is, given your experience, what happens if an employee goes overtime without authorization from their management or HR? Who is liable at the end of the day?
Yeah, Meredith, correct me if you feel I'm wrong. At the end of the day, the employer is 100% accountable here, even if you didn't authorize it. Um, uh, they work the time.
Absolutely.
You have to pay it. Now it's what are you going to do afterwards? And it's back to this communication. How well are your guidelines around overtime authorization? Did the employee know of what those rules guidelines are? Is this a coaching? Are you disciplining? But you still have to pay that overtime.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such a good point talking about, at the end of the day, it's on the company, it's on the employer, it's on leadership. It's so important to reiterate that 100 times over because, again, Woody, we were talking about this prior to even hitting record, right? When it comes to employees, sometimes they think, oh, I'm doing a good deed. I'm logging in extra hours. I'm a star student. I deserve that A plus in terms of work ethic. And at the end of the day, pulling them aside and telling them, hey, you can't do that. Sometimes it sucks because you want to reward them. But at the end of the day, it's costing everybody labor dollars. It's costing it out of the organization's pockets, essentially.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, how can leadership and management develop a better understanding of these regulations surrounding unauthorized overtime compensation? Because I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding around it.
Yeah. To build on your earlier point, the sanitation example I used, that is one that will forever stick with me. I've used with teams before of employer-employee best of intent. Employees are trying to like work through sanitation. Employers like, this is awesome. The teams want to do that. But at the end of the day, it was a 6-figure payout.
Mm.
And it's like, that is painful. Like, seriously? Like, it was all best of intentions. And what resulted out of that was more scripted in terms of who, when, where. Some employees weren't necessarily happy with that, but they understood why that was happening. The answer to the question is, this is another place where HR teams can help the rest of the organization is inform on why those guidelines are in place and what those guidelines are. For example, this in California, if somebody's not taking a full half an hour, we're going to be paying an hour extra.
Yeah.
That was discovered. You had mentioned like sometimes employees come forward. That was an employee coming forward to tell us that was happening, like a new employee. I think this is why it's important, like HR professionals, to every so often do some labor law seminars, those type of things. Stay very equipped. If you have legal counsel, within your organization, to lean on them also. But this is where the HR teams can really help.
There's actually an example, and again, talking about leaning on compliance teams, a lawyer, somebody external to the company who can actually kind of supply that information. We have a tool called the compliance tool on workforce side of things. And there's an article on the site with one of our clients, Amenity Collective. They're a 10,000 staff company, primarily within the hospitality industry. They do a lot across the board. You could kind of get a little bit more of a read on it on the site. But Nicole, who is their HR manager, she was talking a lot about using the compliance tool and actually applying the FLSA specific laws as a template within the compliance tool. And it pretty much sets out their schedule completely compliant to begin with, right? So there's no hesitancy. It's almost like having a lawyer in your back pocket, right? Where there's, specific states are applied to wherever the locations are. And there's, for Amenity Collective, locations across the US, right? They're not just within one state. So making sure that, hey, every manager, Nicole's like, as head of, HR management, she's like making sure that every manager has this template specific to their state already in their back pocket. So that way, when they make their schedules, automatically it's already compliant, it's already in place. So that way, all they need to do is whenever they get their alert on the Workforce app saying, hey, this person hasn't clocked out yet, this person's going overtime, this person needs to take their break, they know that the schedule that they've already lined up is completely compliant with FLSA violations and laws. So yeah, it's knowing when to lean on tools, on external resources, on other people and other teams, and saying, how can I make sure from the get-go that I'm compliant? Because at the end of the day, managers and the organizations themselves almost need to feel like they're the bigger person. They need to be the ones that say, all right, we got to pay up for this, because there's no way out, if the employee, like, even if they think that they're doing a good thing, we are the ones that are held accountable. We're the ones that get our wrist slapped, and it's almost like being the bigger person. So instead, backtracking even further than that and saying, let's make sure from the get-go that our schedules are compliant.
Yeah, I love that. The self-reflection of just like, what is it we didn't do as an organization, as an HR team, ops, sales, whoever, what is it we didn't do to either effectively communicate or help employees understand those guidelines? Another thing I'd throw out there is I've personally negotiated labor contracts, some of the funner parts of my job, but I learned a lot about labor law because usually it's more buttoned up. I'll just say in my experience. So if you have an organization where there are non-union and union areas, like leverage that kind of some of those union sites in terms of understanding of what some of those labor laws are. In my experience, they might have a better understanding.
That's a really great point. That's such a good point. I want to close out by asking my favorite question at the end of each webinar. What are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways that our audience can walk away with to better stop unauthorized overtime hours?
Yeah. All right, we're going to go 3. One is this communicate the schedules, who, what, where, make it very visible. Second, leverage the technology that you've got, time clocks, etc. Communicate those changes. I think of an example where when we did the 7 minutes before and after, we piloted in an area and we communicated to our employees that's what we were doing and wanted to see how it goes, work out the positives, the negatives before we just went full site. So leverage that technology. And third, establish an overtime goal that HR and other departments share. And so you're working on this together. You're engaging frontline leaders and approval processes, etc. So communicate, leverage the technology, establish a goal.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did too. This is all very, very important, pertinent information. So guys, make sure that you subscribe for more videos like this. And Woody, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, until next time, everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching that segment on our webinar on how to stop unauthorized overtime hours for shift-based businesses. If you want to check out more videos, feel free to click on this video here. If you want to look at more videos similar to this type of content, check out our channel. Be sure to subscribe.